go ahead and start our City Council meeting. Welcome to the City Council study session for April the 16th. I believe all of our council is present with the exception of Mr. Heredia, who sent me a text message indicating that he'll be joining us shortly. But I see Mr. Freeman and Whitaker and Ms. Duff and Mr. Luna and Mr. Thompson. Welcome. Good morning. The first item on our agenda for this meeting is to review our agenda for Monday night's meeting. So council, if you please refer to that document. And let's see if we have any questions regarding that. Currently, the only, there are a couple of items off of the consent agenda. The Haas Crossing zoning case and Thomas and Recker zoning matter. Mr. Brady, I believe that the Thomas and Recker item will likely be continued. Is that correct?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we're recommending that that item be continued to the May 18th council meeting. Okay.
So that would leave the Haas Crossing item on the off of the consent agenda for a hearing. I certainly expect that will generate a lot of public comment. So I think just get ready for a longer than usual council meeting on Monday, and we'll someone will likely be reading a lot of comments from folks that want to weigh in on that item. Mr. Thompson.
Mayor, I also would like to have 10F. I know it's going to be pulled from consent, but have that one recommend or request that that one be continued. I have had a couple of emails from residents in Boulder Creek that are asking for the development density to be reduced to be in character with the existing subdivision.
I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson, can you say what I got the F, but I didn't get the first part.
10F.
10F, okay.
Consent.
I know it's already pulled from consent, but I'd like to request that that one be continued also.
Would you say that?
Okay.
Mayor, hold just a second.
Mayor and council, I just, there's no issue with whether we continue 10F, but I would just point out that we should consider continuing all of 10, because in talking with the applicants, especially the state and the private development, they've wanted this to be voted on together. So they don't want the property just annexed in and then not rezoned to a zone that's both acceptable to the property owners and obviously also the city. And so if the council's desire is to continue one of these items, I'd recommend that we continue all of the items.
So that does make sense. I mean, that does make sense if you, this is kind of a puzzle that fits together. And if piece happens without the others, I doubt the applicant. Oh, Mr. Thompson, your request for a contingent 10F is noted. I think we'll talk with the applicant and see if they feel like if that happens, if the entire matter needs to be continued for some reason, or if they are adamant that it proceed forward on Monday's agenda. So, thank you, Council.
Well, I'm sorry. Well, I'm sure that the applicant will want it to continue or want to see it continue moving forward. I'm just asking that it be continued because the subdivision, Boulder Creek subdivision, there's some residents that aren't happy with the density that's going to be backed up to their subdivision, and they want to see the reduction in density. I remember at one of the neighborhood meetings, the residents were told that they could go from their subdivision to this new subdivision, and they would never be able to tell that they left their own neighborhood because the density would be the same, but it's obviously not, and therefore the residents are asking for the density to be reduced to comply with the characteristics of their own neighborhood as they were told it would be.
Okay, well, I feel like I need more information. I think that's the point of this hearing, is to hear those residents come in and make that objection. And if the council's persuaded that that's a compelling argument, then we vote against the zoning case. So let's, I think your request is noted, and we'll talk with the applicant, and I'm not ready to make I'm not ready to impose on them a continuance unilaterally at this point. But it's noted, and I'm sure that this will generate a lot of discussion with the applicant prior to Monday's hearing. Council, other items on our agenda with questions? Welcome, Mr. Heredia. I see you've joined us. All right. I'm not seeing a lot of hands going up. I think I've got 1, 2, 3. I think I got everybody on the screen. Are there no other questions regarding Monday's agenda? If not, referring back to our agenda for this meeting, item 2 is to hear a presentation, discuss, and provide direction on the city's acceptance of federal funding made available under the CARES Act, including the authority of the city manager to sign and submit the required certification and other documents necessary for receipt of the funds. Mr. Brady, I believe you've got Mr. Butler and others ready to talk about this.
Yes, thank you, Mayor and Council. We wanted to bring this item to you to bring you up to speed as far as what we know about the stimulus dollars coming to Mesa, but of most, I guess, timely and urgent matter is to explain to you the need today for me to sign off on a certification so that we can be in a position to receive funds from the federal government as soon as possible. So I want to just kind of give you a sense of what we know today. There's a lot of things we don't know about the program, but we need to move along as fast as they're allowing us to. So Mr. Butler's here to give us some more background and details.
All right, good morning, Mayor, Council. Good to see you this morning. As Mr. Bray just said, we bring some good news, and then I'll frustrate you as well, because there's still a lot of unanswered questions that we are anxious to get before you. But we've been talking about several buckets of different funding and grant opportunities that were part of the CARES Act passed by Congress several weeks ago. Specifically today, we want to talk about the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is a fund that many of you, through your discussions with the National League of Cities, United States Conference of Mayors, and others, are familiar with. This is some of the direct aid that's going to states, counties, and municipalities. We were optimistic, I think, last time I was before you that the city of Mesa would be a direct recipient of those dollars based on our population. The population threshold for directly receiving funds was limited to 500,000. So we were hopeful, even though the law was somewhat vague, that the Treasury Department would use the most up-to-date census estimate numbers. And so let me walk through a little bit and then answer any questions that you may have. But just to remind everyone, under this Coronavirus Relief Fund, there was $150 billion that was appropriated. That broke down to $139 million for states, cities, and counties, and then additional set-asides for tribal nations and for the District of Columbia and some of our territories. So specifically, the sub-pot of that money that we're interested in is the $139 billion. So that was allocated by formula to all 50 states. There was basically a minimum amount that the smallest population state would receive, and then a formula that impacted all the other states with a higher population. So out of that pot of money or allocation that was going to each state, the respective state was guaranteed 55% of that allocation. Now, cities and counties that represent that represent the threshold of 500,000 or above were eligible to receive a proportional share of 45% of the state funding. The state would get any funds that weren't allocated to cities or counties, but there was a set aside that allowed up to 45% to be shared with those entities. And under the law, the only requirement that was imposed upon an eligible entity at this point is if you were deemed eligible by Treasury that you have to certify, that the chief executive of the municipality needs to certify to Treasury that they will follow the law. Even though there's a lot of ambiguity as far as the guidance right now, and we'll get to that, it just needs to certify that, yes, you're willing to accept these dollars and that you will abide by the law and by the CARES Act and guidance from Treasury. So we had on Monday, we received our first round of guidance from the Treasury, and that's where I'm very happy to report that it was memorialized that the city of Mesa is a direct recipient of coronavirus relief funds. We were notified that Treasury would be allowing 2019 census estimates to be used as that number. Those are numbers we all haven't seen and still have not seen. We've seen the 2018 estimates, and we knew that the city of Mesa would qualify under that threshold. But now the Census Bureau does have access to those 2019 numbers, and we'll share that with Treasury as they allocate these fundings. And again, we have not seen what our 2019 number is, but we certainly expect some growth, of course, between 2018 and 2019. There were 5 eligible sub-grantees or direct recipients in the state of Arizona: City of Mesa, City of Phoenix, City of Tucson, Maricopa County, and Pima County. And so that allowed us to have certainty moving forward that we would be direct recipients. In addition to that, Treasury also memorialized the allocation, the financial allocation to each state, and that is where they locked in that the state of Arizona will receive somewhere around $2.8 billion as part of this fund. So what do we know so far? Well, as you might imagine, an 800-page bill allocating $2.2 trillion, written in about 2 days, that left a lot of ambiguity in it. And the Coronavirus Relief Fund is certainly no different. We have some very broad guidance given by Congress that Treasury has been tasked with further fleshing out. So the pure language of the bill basically says that the use of the funds are for necessary expenditures incurred due to COVID-19. Also that these expenditures were not accounted for in the most recently adopted city budget, and that these expenses occur between March 1st of 2020 and December 30th of 2020. So what are we looking for as next steps? First, as Mr. Brady alluded to, we do want to seek council direction on allowing Mr. Brady to submit a form to the United States Treasury today saying that the city of Mesa would like to receive our allocation of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. We're also hopeful, and I was joking with Mr. Brady, I was over on my iPad refreshing the web page, literally, of the Treasury page that allocates this, because any minute now, any hour, we are expecting further guidance to come out from Treasury. They've indicated that they would like to have that out today. So even if we're working on federal government speed, we hope if it doesn't happen today, it will happen tomorrow or early next week at the latest. Under the law, Treasury has to disperse all funds by April 26th to the direct recipients. They've indicated to us they would like the money out the door no later than April 24th. But what we're hearing, we had some new information from Treasury yesterday that they're trying to actually wire the money out within hours or the same day that they receive the certification from the individual entities, and we have heard of some states and different cities who have already received their allocation from the federal government. But going back to our concern about guidance, even if we have it in our bank account, which we want, and I know Mr. Kennington wants to see that happen, we don't want to really allocate any funding from that until we get the guidance, because it's going to be so important that we follow the instructions given by Treasury. So with that, Mayor, Council, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
So Mayor and Council, so thank you, Mr. Butler, for that presentation. As you can tell, this is kind of a blessing and a curse. The blessing is we are going to receive significant amount of resources from the federal government. The challenge that we have is that it's fairly unknown, or is unambiguous about what is an eligible type expense at this point. As soon as we get more information, obviously we'll share that with the council. The other challenge we'll have, even with the generosity of the dollars we're going to get, we have to have those spent by the end of the year. That will also be a significant challenge for us to do. But as council knows, we have already spent some time with our Mesa Cares team doing a lot of the preliminary work to identify the needs in our community. What we're hoping, and yet we don't know that any of that will actually be able to work out, but what we're hoping is many of the items that we presented to you, what's today? Tuesday, sorry. Tuesday afternoon that Carrie presented to you as we did the needs assessment for our residents, our nonprofits, and our businesses. We're hoping very much that the guidance will allow us to meet many of those concerns and needs. And then what we'll be doing is working with different nonprofits, but as well as with city staff programs, and trying to find a way to distribute those dollars based on those specific needs. But as we go along, we'll need to continue to come back to council to have those discussions. The other matter too is because of the significant amount of dollars and the need to spend them quickly because the need is now. Many of the expenditures will be done on an emergency basis of procurement, and which means that as they come back, we will bring all those back to the council, but many times the expenditure will be after the fact. If we've had to go out and provide small business assistance and provide small business, I'm just giving an example, loans, and we've already committed, a couple $1 million of that. We'll be bringing that, items like that or other things where we've had to buy products or PPEs or masks without going through the normal procurement process. We'll have to bring those back to council for ratification. So you'll see those, but in some cases, in order for us to meet the need that exists today, we'll have to move quickly and then come back and ratify a lot of those expenditures. And that's, so we're open, we're available to answer any questions. The most important thing is I'd like to get a nod from the council that you would like me to go ahead and sign off on the certification to the U.S. Treasury today, and so that we can try to get that money deposited. Once that money's deposited, then we're, as Scott says, we're keep refreshing the screen to look for more guidance so that we can start cutting checks and coming up with specific programs on how we can disperse the dollars. I've already been in contact with some of our nonprofits, and we're already talking internally about how to set up staffing and programs in hopes that many of the programs we discussed on the Mesa Cares program will be eligible and will be able to provide direct assistance to the businesses and residents of Mesa. Thank you, Mayor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Brady. So, council, at the conclusion of this discussion, I think we will be entertaining a motion directing Mr. Brady to, as he indicates, go forward with providing, signing and submitting the required certification so we can participate in these funds. So, I know we have some questions prior to getting to entertaining that motion. Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, I would recommend that we move forward on acquiring these funds. We were very fortunate that we made the census threshold. We were just over the $500,000 census and on 2018, and certainly a little bit more on 2019. So I appreciate the work that Scott has done working with the National League of Cities and the Treasury Department. Certainly this is going to be great for our city in terms of providing some relief. I know that for you it's going to be very bureaucratic in trying to ensure that we're following guidance and on the mark relative to dispersing these funds. So I would be very supportive. I just had a meeting yesterday with some of the constituency groups around the country, Many of those represent small communities, and currently there is no monies available to them. We're very fortunate that we met the census requirement to try to acquire these funds. They're going to be dependent on the new legislation that's going to be happening in Congress for them to get additional funding for communities under the $500,000. So yes, I would be very supportive of this. I think this is a way to provide relief to the city of Mesa, and I would encourage my colleagues on council to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Council, other comments or questions on this item? Let's go with Jen and then Jeremy.
I too am supportive of signing off on the certification, and just again, like Councilmember Luna, feel very fortunate that we're able to meet that threshold and be able to react so quickly for our nonprofits and businesses and taking action to soften some of the impact. So I think it's a great thing, and thank you for everybody who's worked very hard on this and continues to execute this. One question I did have is, since we're getting these federal dollars directly, will there be any other dollars that we'll be receiving through the state, or is this the entirety of it?
Mayor,
Thank you.
Councilmember Duff, really good question. I think there's a lot of cities right now that are asking that question. Certainly the cities, some of our neighbors and others who weren't direct recipients of the dollars are hopeful that the state may suballocate some of those dollars, or even that Maricopa County may suballocate some of those dollars down to the cities. That being said, we haven't really received any information from the governor's office about how they intend to allocate their funding, and there's actually even a discussion, as you might imagine, between the legislature and the governor about who gets to make those decisions and how those decisions are made. So I think it may take several weeks before we get some indication from the state. I would imagine, this is just pure speculation, that if they were to suballocate, that they would probably not suballocate to cities that were direct recipients. That being said, we're hopeful, though, that there may be different funding programs that the governor's office and others would choose to fund, of which we could be a direct or indirect recipient of that, depending on the issue that they may choose to address with these funds, whether it be homelessness or transportation or whatever particular program it would be. We would certainly be hopeful that that could also benefit Mesa residents as well.
It's understandable, and since they haven't decided exactly what that allocation looks like, I'm sure there will be some expenditures that would affect our residents in our city, maybe indirectly, not through our city government, but like you said, through transportation or other entities which affect a greater region. So thank you.
Jeremy.
Thanks for the presentation, Scott. My question, I'm doing some off-the-cuff math, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. So I think you'd indicated that it's roughly about $2.8 billion, which for the state of Arizona, which is about $384 a person. Given our population, is it safe to assume we're roughly going to receive about $200 million from the program, or am I completely off with those calculations?
Mayor, Councilmember Whitaker, that's certainly, so that was part of our frustration why we did not want to say a firm number today. Is first of all, when you put a number out there, it's hard to reel that back, and we have not seen, having not seen the 2019 population numbers, there is certainly a wide range. I would say though, Councilmember, we haven't, even our guesstimates have not been quite in that range. We're going to be receiving tens of millions of dollars. That's for certain, but not as high as you just indicated. But I think a very sizable amount that the council will have a lot of opportunity to use wisely.
Okay, and the second question I have, I know with the payroll protection program for small businesses, which is the one I'm most familiar with as it pertains to the CARES Act. Is this similar in the sense that, Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. What was my question again? I completely forgot what I was going to say. Sorry, guys. Well, if anybody else has any questions, feel free. I'll come back if I can remember what I was going to say.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. So, Scott, while we're mulling this over, it seems like this is a very good news, very bad news scenario. I mean, we're going to be receiving some buckets of money that are overflowing that need to be spent quickly, but in limited ways that we still don't really know what the parameters are. But at the same time, we're going to have some revenue shortfalls in other areas that where our regular budget is going to not have the revenues necessary for, non-COVID related city expenditures. So it seems like we're going to be, on an austerity program in some respects and on trying to figure out ways to spend all this money in other areas. Is that, am I seeing things roughly the same way you are? And
Mayor,
is
that's
there a way for-
that's really the challenge in our organization right now. On one side, we're working with several departments and all departments, frankly, having the conversation about how to respond not just to the health safety issues, but the financial impact that's coming to the city, and continuing to develop additional budgets that are reducing our resources and our programs across the board in the city because we're seeing the decline in our revenues. While at the same time, we're trying to figure out how to also support the significant amount of infusion of dollars that we have to be able to spend, but we can't spend on items that were currently budgeted today in our municipal budget, and they can't be used to make up the shortfall of revenues that we're receiving. So it's a difficult challenge because on one hand, we're working through plans and reducing programming, reducing our labor force. On the other side, we're trying to figure out how to ramp up and provide the support and programs to deliver the unknown of as far as what's eligible, but we're trying to guess and make some assumptions based on the survey we did with our community of how we would deliver items around food security and utility and rental assistance or small business assistance, social services. So until we get further guidance, you're going to see staff members and departments working on both plans. They're going to be busily helping us distribute these dollars while at the same time we'll be giving direction for them in anticipation of our discussions at the end of May of June for further reductions because of the impact, the financial impact on our budget. So it's going to be both of these going on at the same time.
And Mayor, also just add to what Mr. Brady said too, and that Treasury has been clear to this point that under the law as it exists today, that this money cannot be used to quote unquote backfill lost revenue. That's been frustrating to governors, city councils, county executives all across the country because this fund was really the only fund allocated out of the $2.2 trillion that has that limitation. You see whether it be airports, and we were glad yesterday to hear that Gateway Airport and Falcon Field will be receiving substantial money coming from their allocations, and that is actually used to backfill lost revenue. You'll hear that from the commercial airlines and others as Congress has looked to prop up certain industries. So we are certainly adding our voice to organizations and other entities that are asking Congress to look at this pot of money, hopefully amend this pot of money to allow cities and states to backfill. But what we do know is that under the law today, we're not allowed to do that. So I think as Mr. Brady was saying, we have to plan under what the guidance we will receive and what the law says, but we just to reaffirm to all of you, because I know you've heard this from your different organizations and discussions you've been in, we're going to try our best to build in some flexibility to that, and hopeful that Congress will reevaluate the prohibition on using some of this to backfill lost revenue.
Thank you. And I know that there's another extension of this program that is being considered as we speak in Congress, the 3.5 program, and hopefully the restrictions on not being, not this money not being able to be spent to shore up regular city operations will be lifted in the next round of funding. I like Mr. Luna, have been part of, and the rest of the council have been part of some national phone calls where cities like ours that fall into this 500,000 category really are the envy of the rest of the country. So I think we need to feel very fortunate that we fall into this category. And we're going to need to be very proactive in pushing this money into our community. I appreciate the work that we heard about in our Tuesday meeting with the Mesa Care program, where we've already done some good due diligence in identifying ways that this money can be used in our community. And I understand that we're now in kind of for the next few hours or days, we're awaiting further guidance from the federal government. But I hope it's clear to everyone that's been watching this council and what the city management has been doing, that we're not awaiting guidance before we make plans and we begin programs that we know are going to be included in this round of funding. So again, I'm anxious to hear any comments or questions from council, but at the conclusion of this discussion, we do need to make an action item and give Mr. Brady the authority to go ahead and submit for these funds.
I remember my
yes,
question,
Jeremy.
Johnny. Sorry for my brain not working a few minutes ago. My question was, much like the PPP loan, I know that for small businesses, it was a loan given to small businesses, but it was forgivable in the sense that as long as you used it for what the intended purpose was, they basically would write off the loan. Is this the same type of thing where this is a loan that if we use it for the right purposes, it just gets wiped out? Or is this a grant? Is this a debt that we're going to have to pay back at some point? Can you help me understand how this money is going to be given to us?
Mayor, Councilmember Whitaker, this is a grant to the city, and so our only restriction will be ensuring that we adhere to the guidance put out by Treasury. And as long as the expenditures are made in accordance with that guidance, this is not money that we will have to pay back. This is a direct grant to the city.
And Councilman Whitaker, it's a good question, but the scary part of that is it sounds great, but if you spend money that is not deemed consistent with the guidelines and the audit that will take place, inevitably will take place after all of this, then you have to pay it back. So that's why we have to make sure, while we're running very fast down the track, we've got to make sure we're carrying the right buckets and we're dispersing the dollars the right way. So that's our biggest challenge right now is, frankly, it's the dollars will be generous. I mean, we would always want more. But making sure we're spending it accurately or spending it on the right things. Right now, we're anticipating a lot of the positions we've redirected to Mesa Cares that have been working on the response to COVID and working with our community, that we would hope that many of those will be able to get their time recovered from this fund, but we don't know. One last, another thought to council, because I know this may, and I know I sometimes have a hard time separating them. If you recall, we had a presentation about the federal dollars that are coming through HUD to CDBG and ESG. Those dollars are also, we're getting a significant amount of those additional dollars coming to Mesa. And while they've been able to loosen some of those specific guidelines as it would normally require under HUD dollars, it doesn't change the fact that those dollars, the HUD dollars that we're getting, the additional dollars, still have to meet the moderate to low income targeted areas, or individuals, and providing for homeless and meeting the needs of those individuals. What I'm hoping is that, and I believe that this will be possible, that this other dollars that we're talking about today will fall outside of those guidelines as far as being able to direct it to provide assistance for the entire, for a much broader range of individuals in our community. While certainly we want to help those that are most vulnerable and impacted by COVID, we want to be broad enough so that anyone, as much as possible, that has been impacted by this pandemic, that there's some level of assistance is what we're trying to figure out, is how we can provide some level of assistance to residents or businesses, small businesses in Mesa. So we're still working through that, and we'll obviously come back to you with that, but I want to make sure we're clear that we have additional dollars coming to us under HUD. Those will be treated in that manner and those restrictions. These dollars, the guidelines we expect will be much broader and will not necessarily be restricted by census tracts, low income to moderate income. We can certainly provide assistance to those individuals. We plan on that, but it'll be much broader than that. Thank you.
I have, sorry.
Hey, Mr. Brady, just a quick question on that end. Is that in addition to the work that we were doing on the CCD allocations for the nonprofits that submitted applications? I'm referring to the funding that we were going to receive for those. Is this in addition to the amount of that funding?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. In addition, there'll be an additional allocation of CDBG and ESG dollars in addition to what, like you just said, what the committee, the council, the whole process we've already gone through with CDBG, and that will continue to go forward. Those recommendations will come forward to council as you've approved, as you've seen them. But there are additional dollars that are also coming to us that we are also working with the nonprofits to prepare them to receive, and we'll be coming to council here in the next week, month to review those with you also.
Okay.
All right, council, before moving forward, any other questions or comments on this topic? Yes, Jeremy.
Yeah, I got one last follow-up, Chris, in regards to your last comment. Do you know what happens to the money if it's used not specific to the things that it's allowed to be used for from the CARES Act? Does that then turn into like a loan at 1% that you have 2 years to pay back? Is it due back instantly? What happens to those funds that are, accidentally, improperly allocated?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my experience in the past, there's an audit that is done. The federal government comes in with audits, goes through all the programming, and then they determine which expenditures were eligible and which ones were not. And then they're working back, there's a payment plan that you have to pay out. I don't remember, it's not like it's just, I think they give you a certain term to pay those back. But we'll have to, and I'm assuming we'll get some of that guidance will come forward, but it's usually just a direct payment back. There's not necessarily, I haven't experienced penalties or interest. They just recognize that you're spending a lot of money, and sometimes you may, documentation, or you allocate it for something that really doesn't fall within the eligibility, and they just note that, send you a audit report. You have time to appeal it. And by the time you go through all that, then at some point you do just have to repay the dollars from the city sources.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Yeah, and obviously I agree with everyone else. I think it's a no-brainer that if the federal government's giving us this money, that we need to take advantage of it. So obviously I'm in full support.
Thank you, Chris and Scott. My understanding is these guidelines are coming out very quickly, maybe even as soon as later today. We're having a meeting Tuesday again. Would you expect that we're going to know a whole lot more by Tuesday, given how fast things are moving?
Mayor, we're very hopeful. Treasury has, I have to compliment them. I haven't seen a federal agency move at so much speed as they have over the last couple of weeks to try to get this money out the door. And so, yes, we're hopeful that as early as Tuesday, we may know a lot more about some additional guidance and the exact allocation that we'll receive. So we hope to have that by Tuesday. One of the things I know we've all discussed internally too is in talking to Mr. Smith and his staff too in legal, that we really want to take some time to go over this guidance. I mean, not in the sense of we all feel the urgency and we want to get this money out the door, but as Mr. Brady alluded to, we just want to make sure that we do it in the right way. And some of the good and the bad, frankly, that we expect based on the comments that we've heard from Treasury officials is that they want to have some very broad guidance and they don't want to put a lot of restrictions on that money, which is great. That's what we want. We want, which will give council more discretion on how we infuse these dollars back into the community or use it for to address expenditures that we've experienced, from PPE to police overtime to other matters like that. But we really want to scrub down the legal side of this, consult with other cities as well to see how they're interpreting this, just to make sure that we don't have to give a dime back to the federal government.
So, Mayor, I would suggest we probably need, Tuesday's gonna be a quick turnaround. So, I mean, if we can, we would. But probably at least a week from today, we would come back with something. Matter of fact, today I was gonna ask council about your Tuesday study sessions. The public safety chiefs are, well, as you saw, Mary's getting very creative with her presentations, but she admitted to me she's running out of things to talk about, because it's always another month. I mean, they are doing well as far as supplies and stuff. So I was going to ask the question, and maybe it's too early, but they are struggling with coming up with some items to talk about on Tuesday afternoons. That if the council wants to continue doing that, and if we have something informative to talk about this program, we can. But I think we're going to give us a certain level of certainty, we're going to need some time to really absorb this. And we're also trying to find, we're trying to also discuss with some of the other cities in the state, Phoenix and Tucson, about their thoughts about how they would spend the money. We think there's safety in numbers, that if we're all kind of using, not necessarily exactly the same for every program, but if there's some larger programs that everybody's kind of working on together, that there may be some safety in numbers, that if we all are kind of doing the same thing, that they may give us some not protection, but a justification with the federal government too in the future.
So that's an interesting question, Council. How do you feel about proceeding with our Tuesday meeting? Speaking for myself, I think that they've been very useful, but I think there's been a need for getting caught up on all that information as the city response to COVID has been geared up. Now that we're at that point, I don't want to be a burden to our public safety chiefs and take time out of their day if the report is, we've still got a month of PPE. We're still waiting for the worst to occur, but they still obviously are very, very busy. This does seem like a particularly interesting time because I think time is of the essence on pushing out these dollars. And I am anxious to get the word out to the nonprofits and the faith community and anybody out there who's got great ideas or maybe is seeing how COVID is impacting the community. We want to be shouting from the rooftops, hey, we've got money to spend on addressing this problem. Please help us know where the needs are in our community. So I could go either way, but the idea of possibly giving the chiefs a day off from reporting to council seems appropriate. Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I agree, Mayor. I find the meetings interesting in the fact that that we're getting updated. But I think as long as Mr. Johnson continues to provide updates on the EOC and what's happening there, as well as Mr. Wright continuing to feed us the information from the state level, I think most of us are, or at least I know Councilmember Luna and I know Mr. Butler is also receiving updates from NLC on the what's being done at the federal level. So I think we're getting the information we need. So as long as personally, I feel that as long as we continue to get the updates so that we know what's going on and that we're all marching to the same beat and we're all on the same page, because that was my original concern, is that there was a lot of information going out and not everybody on council knew what the information was. And so different messages were going to each of our constituents. So I think as long as we're all on the same page getting the updates and information. I'm fine with not having Tuesday meetings.
But yes, Jan.
I'm actually in support of continuing the Tuesday meetings, but certainly we can modify it to be more respectful of the time. I noted that on the last Tuesday meeting, we had something like 2,000 views on Facebook watching it live. So I think there's a lot of interest from our public who needs updated. So if we don't want the public safety update, we don't feel like there's anything new to report, maybe there's another way that we can report that, or have someone just kind of report out during the meeting. But because of the funding and things that the whole situation is very dynamic as far as addressing the disease and the funding available. And I think having a meeting set aside just to discuss that, so our regular council meetings don't get drawn out to many hours, that during our regular council meetings, we can keep it at just business at hand to run our city. And then Tuesdays can be set aside for these extras around addressing the disease, whether it be funding or changes in policy or things that we've noticed. And I'm open to that being flexible, so it looks differently, but I would like to retain the Tuesday just to separate it out and to have the public information distributed on that. And people know on that Tuesday, we will be updating each other and them as much as we can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jen. Frankie and then Mr. Freeman.
Yeah, no, my comments are the same as Jen's. I think if we want to, change it up as far as the structure and maybe just get a brief briefing from the public safety personnel by somebody else, if that doesn't have to be the chief, or that is something that we can maybe think about doing. But I think per Jen's comments on, just having more information out there on specifically this topic is important. Especially as we roll out different initiatives over the next couple of weeks as we get more guidance from the federal government, and having the public kind of tune into a specific COVID response from the city is beneficial for us to push out as much as information as possible and be as much as transparent as possible with the residents of Mesa. I think that's going to be critical for us in the next couple of weeks as we discuss various different programs and initiatives that we have. So I would say, I think flexibility on structure on agenda, but I think we should keep on going these Tuesday regular meetings, as there's been a boon on Channel 11, I'm assuming, and on Facebook, and people viewing these sessions to get more information. So,
okay, thank you, Mr. Freeman.
Thank you, Mayor. I've listened to all the comments, and could we do a summary or bullet points of the chief's findings of the past week instead of them specifically coming on the meeting? In other words, I like the summary that Chief Johnson sends out on the EOC. That could be incorporated to a summary. That information is still then sent out to whoever's viewing our meeting. But yet, I agree, we kind of need to probably put more the gas pedal down on getting the information out from the Mesa CARES Act, the monies we're receiving, and how we're going to wrap around that and give Mr. Brady the authority to participate in that process. So I guess what I'm asking is kind of a compromise, a bullet point summary. I don't necessarily need the chiefs on. I enjoy their presence. However, if there's any immediate needs, then I can address it with my constituents with the information I get on a summary and bullet points, and then go into the Mesa CARES and how we're going to allocate those monies, I think is another priority. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeremy.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Mark. I think a hybrid approach is probably going to be the best solution at this point. I don't see why as opposed to taking time to schedule an entire meeting on Tuesday, we couldn't do some form of a special meeting before our Thursday morning study session, and then just get a summary recap of what data the chiefs want us to have, much like we do some of our other special board meetings. And I want to point out one other thing. I think that the urgency in Arizona is sort of dying down in the sense that as we heard from Chief Camelli last week, we have flattened that curve, and now the date is much later, right? Like our peak date now is, I believe, supposed to be in May and no longer in April. And if you look at the metrics per capita, like if you look at the positive test rates per capita, the last numbers I'm showing are Arizona's at 0.054%, where the average is much higher. So anyways, I think Arizona's much less on the average than any other state, and we're not experiencing what they're going through in New York, New Jersey, Louisiana, Massachusetts. So I'm all for doing a summary meeting or some other hybrid approach that doesn't require the entire staff to take time out of their day on Tuesday afternoons.
Thank you. So, Mr. Brady, I think obviously you've heard these comments. To me, my takeaway is I think the urgency is shifting to some extent away from getting reports from public safety chiefs, unless there's something that needs to be discussed, maybe towards the city's response to the financial challenges that we have, and particularly how we're going to push these funds out into the community. So let's go ahead and keep this Tuesday's session on the agenda. I don't think any of us are really expecting that the chiefs are going to be there unless you feel like there's a need for that. But I am really on pins and needles like the rest of us, waiting to see what these federal guidelines are. And even if it's a short meeting on Tuesday, if we get some initial some news as to what direction, what things are now clearly in the category of capable of being funded, I think that would be useful not just for the council, but for the entire community, for us to start, again, pushing that information out and then getting these funds into the community. Council, before we leave this, I do need a motion directing Mr. Brady to sign and submit the required certification for us to proceed with this funding. I see Mr. Luna's hand went up, followed by Mr. Freeman. So let's have a motion by Mr. Luna and a motion seconded by Mr. Freeman. And then because this is an action item, we'll need to do a roll call vote because this is a remote meeting. I vote aye for that motion. Mr. Freeman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Whitaker?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Heredia?
Aye.
Thank you. Ms. Duff?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Luna?
Aye.
Thank you. Mr. Thompson?
Aye.
Thank you. The vote is unanimous in favor of directing Mr. Brady to sign and submit the required certification to receive the funding that we just discussed. Is any other discussion items on that, under that agenda item? Thank you. Mr. Brady, I think you heard the discussion also on the schedule. I see the next item on our agenda is current event summary, including meetings and conferences attended. Council, who has something to share? Mr. Freeman.
Yeah, I had hosted the meeting with the National League of Cities and the large city council, and I was really taken back and kind of shocked wave about other municipalities and cities. So we had cities from San Jose, Seattle, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., and there's probably two others, can't remember, but they all are experiencing, as we've discussed, serious COVID issues, financial hardships. One of them was Detroit. I remember that because she said that they're experiencing $190 million shortfall in their budget. And of course, that it's been hard for them to survive over there. But however, Seattle, Washington is experiencing a hepatitis A outbreak in their community, along with the COVID. They're having to grapple with that. So I feel, listening to what's affecting our community and our metropolitan area, we're pretty insulated from a lot, and other cities are really struggling. So I commend our city staff, our Mesa Cares, our community outreach, and especially we need to drill down into our businesses, because that was one of the emphasis of all the communication as I hosted this, is how are our businesses going to survive, and how are we going to get them monies back to help them recover and get back into operation. So with that, I had a really powerful meeting, and I appreciate being able to host it this past week. Thanks, Mayor, Council.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Mr. Luna.
Thank you, Mayor. I also held, we had a constituency presidents meeting this past Tuesday that representatives from, I'm president of Hispanic elected local officials, as well as APAMO, LGBTQ, NBC Leo, and WIMAGE. And we all talked about the issues related to the federal funding. I will say that all of those communities, with the exception of Mesa, will not be getting federal funds. And so they are clamoring, they are doing everything possible to request from the federal government that funds be allocated to smaller communities. So I appreciate the work that Scott has done in our city related to trying to acquire these funds. I know it's going to be a difficult job trying to spend these funds and make sure that we're spending them right, but we're very fortunate that we do have the ability to get some of these funds to help many of our nonprofits, as well as other groups within the city of Mesa. So, it was a very positive meeting, and we will continue meeting. I'm planning to hold a Hispanic elected local official meeting probably sometime next week, and so we can come up with ideas in terms of how we work with our Hispanic communities throughout the country. The other thing that we're doing, Councilmember Heredia and I will be hosting an education forum in Spanish. So we're looking forward to that. We'll be doing that next week. That's the plan. And I'm also working with some business leaders here in the Falcon District to try to talk about issues related to small businesses and medium and large businesses in terms of how we can come together to resolve the issues that many of these businesses are facing in District 5. So a lot of activity, even though despite the fact that I spend most of the time at home, but there's a lot of activities happening online via Zoom and on telephone calls. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Luna. Council, other comments under this item?
I got one last
I appreciate it. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Yeah, so I just want to make note that the Paycheck Protection Program, the $350 billion program by the feds, just ran out of money this morning. So I think that we're going to have to get creative, on how we support our small businesses with the money coming in from the program that we discussed this morning. So hopefully we can find ways to specifically address small businesses and directly back to the individuals. I'm sure everyone's following the unemployment numbers. We saw another 5 million people unemployed in that report that came out this morning. So I hope that we're coming up with a good plan to help stimulate our local economy.
Okay, thank you. I was pleased to have a digital summit last Thursday focused on the education community with the superintendent of Mesa Public Schools, President of Mesa Community College, and our librarian, Heather, sharing resources with families. Today at 1 o'clock, we're going to have another digital forum. This time it will focus on coping skills. I think we've all struggled or become painfully aware of the challenge. One of the big challenges of going through this experience is being isolated. This is not just a summer vacation. This is a crisis management situation. So a lot of our families and individuals in the community are struggling with physical health, mental health, emotional health. So I encourage folks to tune in at 1 o'clock today at the mesaz.gov/digital summit, Facebook online. We'll have experts coming and talking about resources that are available to help all of us as families and individuals to deal with how we cope with the mental and emotional stresses related to what we're going through. Council, any other current events or events that you'd like to talk about? All right, Mr. Brady, tell us about our schedule. I think we encourage you to go ahead and schedule a meeting for this Tuesday, even if it is short, just to get caught up on breaking news from the federal government. But anything else, what else is on our agenda?
But just a reminder, we do have the council meeting on Monday. So we may, if we have anything to present, maybe we will know, I don't know. Maybe we'll know how much we're receiving by then. We can share that with you on Monday. And then, as you said, that's the council meeting. I think we start at 5:30. And then for a brief study session, and then following, then the next day, of course, Tuesday at 2 o'clock, we'll continue our briefings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That concludes the items on our agenda for this meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn? Thank you, Mr. Luna. We'll do this by unanimous consent, so we'll just do one voice vote. So please unmute your microphones. All in favor of adjourning this meeting, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. We are adjourned.